You're listening to Stellar Success, Leveling Up for Medical Pros with Dr. Tudor Francu. Join us as we explore how medical professionals can achieve stellar success in all areas of life. It's time to level up.
Dr. Kuhlman, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm great. Thanks for coming over. Stellar Success Podcast, again with a great guest today. I want to start with one of your quotes, which says the purpose of life is to have a life of purpose. What is your purpose?
Um, I think at the end of the day, it's to provide trusted medical advice to all those that um, I connect with in life.
Very nice. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your journey? How did you start in this thing? What have you done and where are you now?
Sure. Um, so the long version is in one of my three books called Transforming Presidential Healthcare, but I'll give you the short version. I grew up outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Um, I was in a hurry like Alexander Hamilton. At age 19, 24 months after I graduated from high school, I had completed my bachelor's degree. A pre-med bachelor's degree is pretty cut and dry, and was accepted into medical school and accepted into a Navy health profession scholarship. And so with that, I went out to Loma Linda, California to do medical school. So I did medical school for 4 years, stayed there and did a family medicine residency to start. And then I had to pay back the Navy for 4 years. And my 4 years, I wasn't very good at counting, turned into a total of 30 years in the Navy. So during Desert Storm and Desert Shield, I was up in the high desert, at the Stumps, which is 29 Palms in the high desert, about 45 minutes north of Palm Springs. And then I spent 3 years hardship tour in Pearl Harbor. And my wife and I had just gotten married, so that was great for us, kind of get away from family, friends, and you sink or swim on your own. So we lived in Pearl Harbor for 3 years. And then the Navy, we said, hey, what should we do with the Navy? So they sent me to across two oceans to the embassy in London. And there at the embassy in London, um, Naval Forces Europe, I had stopped and become a naval flight surgeon in Pensacola. And it was in the basement of the embassy. So we spent about 4 years there as a family physician and a flight surgeon for all those stationed in the United Kingdom. And then again, you meet that decision point, and the Navy said, we're sending you to Quantico, Virginia, the crossroads of the Marine Corps, to be the senior flight surgeon for the President's helicopter squadron, which is known as HMX-1. That flies the White Tops, the VH-3s, the VH-60s. So with that, you get the top secret Yankee White clearance, and you provide care for all those that go on presidential missions about a week ahead for any of the overseas trips. President Clinton was kind of in a lot of trouble at the time domestically, so he wanted to cement his legacy around the world, like many presidents do during their second term. At the end of my tour there, we knew President Bush narrowly defeated Vice President Gore. Supreme Court made a decision on that one. And so at the end of 2000, the Navy sent me orders to report to the White House to be one of the White House physicians. And so I found myself doing that for the next 13 years, which was during President George W. Bush. His dad, former president, was still around at times. And then when President Obama, I became the director of the White House Medical Unit. And then when President Obama came in, he said, I'm pretty healthy. I don't really need a doctor, but Michelle and the girls do. So I'm going with you. So he made me the physician to the president. So that I did that until 2013. And kind of at that time, I'm 50 years old. I had 30 years in the Navy. I'd been presidential support for 16 years. I still had a wife and kids that would talk to me. So that was the time to jump to the private sector. So Advent Health, down in Orlando, Florida. It's the only national healthcare system headquartered in Florida, but Orlando was on my wife's approved list, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I came to be a chief medical officer at their flagship hospital in Orlando, which was It's the largest hospital in the US, the biggest biller of Medicare. And then after about 6 years to shift over to be the chief quality safety officer for 55 hospitals in 9 states, where I find myself today. And it's just it's just an honor and a privilege to serve the Navy 30 years and to serve Adventist healthcare for 15 years.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story, and I'm sure you've been through a lot all those years that you talked about.
Yeah,
You've
some
seen,
of it's being in the right place at the right time, but yes,
right,
yeah.
and you probably you were faced with a lot of challenges and things that you needed to take care of. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit into your mindset and to your approach, like your personal approach to being, a physician that takes care of presidents and White House staff and all those high-rank individuals. It's a big responsibility and also comes with, I'm sure, big rewards. What do you think were the habits and the routines and the protocols, I would say, that yourself needed to establish first to be able to, you know, do a good job in all those positions that you were all these years?
So I would say, ironically, when you're talking about VIP care, those that you think in life have the best medical care often do not. And healthcare is still information, relationships built on trust. So you have to make sure that you have an appropriate relationship with a patient, one that's not built on, you know, friendship or built on a, political or you're a sycophant. It has to be based on that doctor-patient professional relationship. And
Hmm.
then you also have to make sure that the information you're providing them is evidence-based, but also that practice-based experience that's kind of that, putting that common sense um, into it. You got to filter out a lot of kind of nonsense. Um, Other physicians that I'm working with, I would always make sure that if you're a primary care physician, do not take shortcuts. Do everything that you're trained to do in the evaluation of that condition, which should be about 95% of things that get thrown up in your face. Then the opposite is working with specialists, who have unique skill set in their field, their narrow field, is keeping them from doing everything that they're trained to do. For example, a gastroenterologist does not need um, multiple MRI, CT, endoscopy up and down, and biopsies of every orifice. What's the condition that we're talking about, and then what's the standard of care for evaluating that? So that's kind of the paradox of both of those. How I practiced is, my first day of medical school, we had this older dean who had been there many years. He was famous for, he called all of us by name on day one with that facial recognition that he had. And, he taught us three things. Listen to your patients. They'll tell you what's wrong with them. Do not be over enamored with technology. And then every patient, give them something in their time of need. Maybe that's a medication, maybe that's some advice, maybe that's a procedure, or maybe it's just a hand to hold, a shoulder to cry on, but give them something during their time of need. So whether, it's the President of the United States, or whether it's an individual at the free and charitable clinic that I work at, or whether it's someone on a global missions trip that has never even seen a doctor before, follow those three things and listen to them, and they'll tell you what's wrong with them.
Yeah, that's a great approach. The fact that technology took over so much in medicine, and I remember being a resident in my years, and we didn't have that much technology at that time. But nowadays, like every single little condition is diagnosed basically based on a technology screen rather than a clinical approach of the doctor. I remember appendicitis used to be, the standard of clinical care and diagnosis at that time. And now you cannot put a diagnosis of appendicitis without having a CT or a contrast MRI or something like that. And it became up to a point that maybe the students and the residents are not focused on the clinical exam that much. How do you practice? How did you practice? Because you were faced with like high rank individuals, right? Including the presidents of the United States, that you have to create a rapport with that patient clinically, right? So you're not gonna, I mean, what do you say to the president of the United States? You need to go take a CT scan for me to take a look at, or should I examine you first?
Um, well, I guess I would use a real life example. So the first book that I wrote was called Transformative Healthcare, and the opening chapter is, um, we were on board Air Force One. There's a physician and a critical care nurse. We're the only two medical people on board, with about 100 passengers, and we're about halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, headed to India for a state visit, and this middle-aged gentleman who works for the State Department. Um, I was summoned to evaluate him by the Secret Service and said, "Hey, we need your help." So, he had chest pain, and so I could not rely upon um, advanced imaging technology.
Yeah, this is during a flight, right?
Yeah, it's during a
Yeah,
flight. But more importantly, I asked him the appropriate questions, and then I pulled out of, my mind a risk-based approach. So I used the heart score, which the heart score had not even been validated at that time yet. So what's the history? I could do a 12-lead EKG. I knew his age. I knew his risk factors of, smoking, lipids, hypertension, diabetes, those Framingham risks that each of them kind of give you a point. And then also troponin. We had a point of care troponin that we could do. And so when you have a normal 12 lead, you have a normal, non-elevated troponin, and you factor in his age, his risk factors, and his history, then you can place him into low risk, medium risk, or high risk. So, I said, your chance of having a major adverse cardiac event in the next 45 days, it's not zero, but it's pretty close to zero. And so then a few hours later, um, we did another troponin, we did another EKG, and that was more kind of just to do something. But the conventional wisdom at the time was, if you have the two different non-elevated troponins. So that's not a CAT scan, a CT angiography.
right.
That's not a but um, uh, anyone else would have probably turned the plane around and landed it, because here's a patient with chest pain.
Yeah.
So just maybe some I don't want to call it low tech, but the most important thing was me, the doctor, asking the right questions and using risk stratification. And it's always
Yeah.
good to be lucky and lucky to be good.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think it's low technology, but very high intellectual ability as a medical professional to decide on this kind of, differential diagnosis. Um, it's interesting to me that when you are appointed to this kind of, positions like you were and deal with very high rank individuals, security clearances and all the 9 yards that comes with it, I'm sure. Um, you are not faced with only successes, but sometimes things don't go the way you want it. And maybe you have some failures, or maybe you have some setbacks in your career. Um, what are some examples of those in yours?
Um, well, to me, some of the successes were, setting up um, a systematic way to provide care for the president. Um, in 2001, at the time, we had 6 doctors, 6 nurses assigned to the White House Medical Unit, and each of them were good in their own right, but they would carry different equipment and they had different training that they would keep current. So we sat down and we said, what's our number one mission? What's the number one threat? So the number one mission is continuity of the president, keep the president alive. And back then they were about 50-year-old men. The number one medical threat is sudden cardiac arrest. So sudden cardiac arrest, every day in the US, 1,000 Americans drop dead. So um, let's keep a biphasic AED with a trained person who has current clinical competence. I've trained on it within 2 minutes. We know that every minute that you wait, 8 to 10% increase in mortality. And then the second set of hands is that critical care nurse and able to jump in and do, ACLS. But, meds and compressions aren't as good as electricity, on the individual. And so that was our number one threat. So then everyone's trained the same, standardized, has the same plan. The number two threat is, unfortunately, 4 times in our nation's history, a president's been assassinated. Most medical historians, when I've looked at it, I don't think anything could have been done for Lincoln or for Kennedy. They had fatal blows to the brain, to the head. If you look at Garfield and if you look at McKinley, they got the medical care at the time, but that's probably what killed them is exploration. The conventional wisdom was dig inside, pull out the, the shrapnel, pull out the bullets. And we all know that they both got sepsis and died, days, weeks later, probably from the doctors probing fingers around with not antiseptic technique. And we didn't have antibiotics back then. So, when I was 17 years old, it was March 30, 1981. I was a lift truck operator at Little Debbie in Chattanooga. I was driving to work about 2:30 in the afternoon. As a senior in high school, and I heard, President Reagan shots fired at the Hilton, and later we learned out he had been hit. And what saved his life is, not the doctor who was a neurosurgeon without any equipment, just left on the sidewalk and wasn't even part of the solution, but the special agent in charge, Jerry Parr, that threw him in the beast, the armored limo, jumped on top of him. They went racing down Connecticut. At the time, shots fired, the Secret Service plan is go back to the fortress. So they were headed back to Crown, which is the code name for the White House. And Jerry Parr saw a drop of blood on the corner of Reagan's mouth and said, forget this, we're going to the hospital. So they veered right instead of left, showed up at GW, and Reagan did walk in, but then he crumped inside. The doctors and nurses that jumped on him treated him like a trauma patient. They did not treat him like the president, and that's what saved his life and eventually took him to surgery, and he recovered. So, and then every single president, there's been assassination attempts, whether some make the news, others don't. We saw with Butler, Pennsylvania last year with a presidential candidate, Trump, that he dodged a bullet. America dodged a bullet that day. But so the number one threat is gunshot wound, knife stabbing, and so what do we do? So the plan was pretty simple: keep the blood in the body, get to definitive care. So in the from 2000 to 2010. We had advances in combat medical care on the fields of Iraq and Afghanistan. So how do we bring those learnings to the White House? An ER doctor is king inside of the emergency department, but once you get, outside of the ED, physician, paramedic, layperson, we're kind of all the same. There's everybody's equal. So, Clint Eastwood, a man's got to know his limitations, and so what we would do is make sure that we were clinically trained. We would go to, back then we'd go to Jackson Memorial, which is the Knife and Gun Club in Miami. We would do trauma training. Some of us had gone to shock trauma in Maryland. Some had gone to LA County. But we made sure that we had some of that hands-on experience. Some of the PAs, the junior physicians that were coming into the unit, had come straight from Afghanistan or Iraq. But then we have a standard approach. Shots fired. The most important thing is keep the protectee from getting hit again. With shots fired, care under fire is what I called it. You don't worry about C-spine stabilization. You don't worry about fluids, but you do want to make sure that you have hemostatic bandages, tourniquets applied properly. So you have the equipment, you have that, you put it on, and then you move to definitive care. So whatever means is the quickest: helicopter, armored suburban, armored car, white ambulance, black ambulance, pickup truck, whatever you have, get to definitive care. And it is not the closest ED. We want to go to the level 1 trauma center. So Secret Service has that, on the plan. People say you're telling trade secrets. Well, we have alternate, plans in place too. So anywhere in the world, we want to get them there. So number one is sudden cardiac arrest. Number two is gunshot wound. Number three is asymmetrical threats. So chemical, biological attacks. The big five are anthrax, smallpox, tularemia, plague, and viral hemorrhagic fever. So basically, you got to think about it. You got to have be able to go through the training to recognize what they cause. You got to have the medications that counter that. And then also with same thing with chemical, you got to know about decontamination, and you have to know the antidotes. And you can't take them to a specialized place. You got to be able to do that, right there where the attack is. So those are kind of the first three things that we standardized. And the fourth is what I would call, whole person care for the president. So mind, body, spirit. Many of us know, those three things are intertwined. So that can get us down a whole tangent of fit for duty.
Yeah,
And all
right.
of that's kind of laid out in transforming presidential healthcare. You asked about some of the failures. So, one of just how I'm built is, I've kind of got that work ethic of, do it myself. And, um, uh, sometimes sometimes I would underestimate the, maybe the blind ambition that, some of the team members had, where they would, they maybe were going out for their own personal glory. And I think we've seen that play out in history, where I'm more subdued, and I am the world's worst self-promoter or marketer. So others would say, why don't you, tell everybody about how great we are? And my attitude was just kind of show them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's interesting for me to know that um, you said a few moments ago that there's some things that, obviously presidential attacks or attempts to the president that you took care of, but some of them are not known or not public, I would say.
Yeah, yeah,
Is there a protocol in the White House medical team to be able to divulge any of those, I would say, events or unfortunate events that happen to the president? Not necessarily, a public event like an attempt for assassination or something like that. Maybe something internal or personal to that specific president that happens.
yeah,
Do you have a protocol to,
yeah.
in place for that?
So
Because
for the
I'm sorry,
yeah,
there's been recent talk, I would say, after President Biden withdrew from his, you know, um, as a candidate for the election, that some people said that there were some signs during his late months of presidency that maybe some medical personnel would have been more aware of than others, and
yeah,
nothing was said.
yeah.
I'm just curious what the protocol is for those kind of situations.
Yeah. So a couple different areas. One is, um, there's plans about, um, the physician. It's part of what I call protective medicine. You're a doctor with equipment that's embedded inside of the bubble of men and women with guns. And so
Yeah.
that's called protective medicine. So with that, for the president, um, every physician, I had the top secret Yankee White, which means dealing with the president, and then category one, which is the highest. So um, I would make sure that I followed all of that top secret clearance to maintain that. With that, you also sign non-disclosure agreements. So I would never tell you, um, like, if there's contingency areas somewhere in the world. Um, all of us could speculate, but all of that type of information, I would do a non-disclosure agreement. I put a lot of those type of things into the book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare, but I submitted it to the Pentagon, the
Hmm.
Department of Defense Security Review pre-publication, and they took about 4 months, and then they gave me a letter that things that are in the book, um, it's okay for that to be out there.
Yeah.
The second level is I told the 5.5 presidents that I was honored to take care of, I'll always protect your personal privacy and your medical privacy. So, that's where you kind of get into some of the HIPAA stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I was involved with several of the physicals for President Bush, and then the first two physicals during the first term for President Obama. I was in charge of them. Um, I would meet with the president and before the first one, we just were on a golf cart at Martha's Vineyard, and President Obama told me, never lie to the American people. They always find out the truth anyway.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty good advice. So I said, here's the test we want to do. Here's the conditions we're going to take care of, and evaluate. It's your time to go and get that done, and do that preventive medicine evaluation. And then if there's any ongoing issues, just get it done. And so then I'd write up the report. He never changed a word in them. President Bush never changed any of it. And, um, we released it. Sometimes maybe he's not happy because I say continue smoking cessation efforts, which means,
Yeah.
the first one he was smoking, he did quit about a month after that report. And as far as I knew, never broke that again while I was there. Um, if you shift over to President Biden, I think that I am the voice just crying in the wilderness that um, any president or presidential candidate over the age of 70 should have neurocognitive assessment, more than just the 1 or 2 minute MOCA, which is a screen for severe dementia.
Yeah.
And it's just a fact of science that after the age of 60 and for the next couple decades, there is rapid deterioration of cognitive ability, memory, reasoning, speed of processing, spatial visualization. Those four. Vocabulary oddly kind of stays the same or actually bumps up a little bit because just more life experiences. So New York Times reached out, invited me to write an essay about that, which I did, and it actually was published 9 a.m. the morning that President Biden dropped out of the campaign later that afternoon. So I don't know if he or his advisors were sitting there drinking coffee and go, "That's it," or if it's
Yeah.
just coincidence.
That was
Yeah,
the drop in the bucket,
yes.
probably.
So if we go on cognitive decline, if you go back to James Madison, probably was when he submitted the final draft of the Constitution, I don't know, like September 17, in 1983, or something about that. He was 36 years old. So he submitted that. Um, President Washington, he was president for 8 years. He had his physician, James Craik. He brought him over from regimental surgeon. So from day one, there's been a physician with the president. President Washington, when he left office after 8 years, he was 65. He died less than 2 years later. So, fast and during the 1780s, an American male who reached the age of 20, many didn't, but reached the age of 20, they were lucky if they lived to age 60. So the founding fathers did not put any physical requirements in to be president. They just put
Yeah.
in natural born citizen over the age of 35, which was interesting because that's what Madison was, when he wrote it. Hey, I'm 36, so I'm old enough. And the natural born citizen, we know that's not true. The first six presidents were born British subjects. They were not born Americans. They were, in the colony. Um,
Yeah.
and then if you say, fast forward to today, 20% of our senators are over the age of 70. We have a 91-year-old senator. Unfortunately, I was around and interacted with Strom Thurmond when he was senator back in 2001, 2002. He was 100. He had profound dementia and had been for many years. It's a bipartisan issue. Robert Byrd was 92 and had lost a step. Dianne Feinstein last year, she had encephalitis. Herpes encephalitis is like 70% fatal. So thank God she lived, but she had profound neurocognitive issues, and her people around her and the party leaders kept her in office until she died a few months later. Supreme Court justices, I think 4 of the 9 are way over 70. So our congressmen, scores and scores of them, are just too old. So the founding fathers never meant for us to live under a gerontocracy, which we do. So we have a 79-year-old president. He seems to be with it, but he is not as sharp as he was, 20 years ago. And we don't have
Yeah,
a
I
good
mean,
way.
we all know what happened to Reagan, right, in the
Yep.
last few
Yep.
months of his presidency, and
Yep.
it was very obvious and sad, but it's a
And
fact
even
of
even his
life.
doctors won't admit it. Like
Right.
if you talk to the doctors that took care of him,
Yeah.
they're just too close to it. So
Yeah.
that's where if you're over 70, even President Trump, if he did neurocognitive assessment, maybe you don't have to release it, but could give it to his doctor, Sean Barbabella, who's his doctor now. Here are the results of it: memory, reasoning, speed of processing, spatial visualization. And then they would say, okay. And then each of the next 7 years, or I'm sorry, 3 years, I forgot he already said, but the next 3 years, just make sure that at age 82, he's still he still has enough firepower to, it's a 24/7, 365 job that's unforgiving. And part of what happens with reasoning is you have that stubborn grandfather that listens to advice around him and still makes that hard-headed decision. So that's not just personality, or that's just not grandpa being grumpy, but it's because they've lost that reasoning skill. And the leader of
Yeah,
the
and
free world, age is not just a number.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely have some limitations in terms of other
Yeah.
professions or skills that we have, right? Several jobs have a limit on age, uh, and
Yeah.
this is probably the most important job that
Yeah.
you can
Airline
have.
pilot, airline
Right,
pilot, and FBI agent,
right.
like 65 and 57. And that's because of public safety.
Yeah,
So obviously the
exactly.
biggest public safety, national, international security is President of the United States. So if
Right.
there's not a societal will, politicians, they always just preserve themselves, keep themselves in power. So we're not going to have term limits. They're not going to put an age requirement in. But that's where my advice is, if you're over 70, you would benefit from neurocognitive assessment every year.
Those exams need to be public though, because I'm assuming that once you have to do an exam on people, at this age, with the kind of function and responsibility that comes with the position, everybody
I'm,
should know.
I mean, that's certainly a good opinion. If when candidate Trump got shot in the ear and he got a CAT scan done of his head, um, a congressman who used to be a doctor said, "Oh, it was normal," but there was nothing released.
Yeah.
They didn't have a neuroradiologist release, that he had lacunar infarcts or he has normal aging of the brain. So the tests that are already out there, President Trump has had cardiac testing that, if you listen to, back in
Mhm.
2018, Dr. Jackson, got up and talking about he's going to live to be 200, but then some of that is some calcium scores. So there's lots of tests that the president and his physician choose not to release today.
Yeah.
President Biden, um, after prodding, when was the last PSA that he got done? Well, it was 2014 when he was 72. So sure, they followed some imperfect guidelines that we all know, tend to stop at age 70. Um, but they still haven't said, was it a normal number or was it, abnormal? And
Yeah.
if you talk to a urologist, they'll say, well, it depends on if it's 2.5 or 4.5. And so
Right.
they kind of choose to release what they want to release.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, what kind of advice would you give to someone who wants to do what you were doing?
Um, well, probably the best advice is to, not want to do it, not want to do it as a goal. And the people that seem to do the best are, if they have that servant leadership attitude, if they were not seeking the job, the current physician was not seeking the job, Dr. Barbabella, so I think he's going to do great. Um, you, Today, you have to be active duty military for one of the Army, Navy, Air Force physician jobs: emergency medicine, internal medicine, family medicine. It's preferred that you have operational experience. So just you've been with a squadron, you've been, with special ops, you've been with a dive team. That just rounds you out in your experiences. Um, and just be open-minded to in civilian healthcare, it all revolves around the doctor and what his schedule is.
Yeah.
This is the exact opposite. It revolves 100% around the president and what his schedule is. And then you've got to fit into that. If the president walked by and said, "Hey, doc, I need to see you tomorrow at 7," I say, "Got it." I don't run over and say, "Is that 7 a.m. or 7 p.m.?" But, I know, maybe the personal aide that I ride in the spare limo with, I say, "Hey, the president mentioned he wants to see me tomorrow at 7. Could you, can you give me some advice about if it's AM or PM and what it's about?" And, you kind of have to know who to go to. And the best way is, if you take care of everyone that's there, and not just, well, because anybody will take care of, stop what they're doing and take care of the president. But it's really by caring for those who care for the president, you're caring for him. So we called it care by proxy. You got to stay within the guidelines of what's legal and ethical, but it's also what keeps you on top of your game. And then others around him will also say, that doctor's not in it just for glory seeking, but is truly just is providing good advice and has good information.
Right. Also, kind of a same question, but addressed to you, like with all the experience and wisdom and everything that you accumulated by now, if you would look back to yourself, would you change anything? What advice
Yeah.
would you give to yourself?
Yeah, to me, I probably would have um done things a lot differently. I've learned a lot kind of in the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned more about um, create a team that has more voices in it. Um, don't necessarily trust one or two people that are helping you get things done. I always found that kind of a third of the unit did all the work and getting everything done. A third were kind of complaining, and then there's that third in the middle. So probably if I had to do things over, I'd figure out, what are the issues that the third that aren't happy, and try to figure out, do they have a legitimate grief or not? And then also the third that are getting everything done. Um, how can I help them follow more work-life balance and make sure they're doing it for the right reason and not for kind of blind ambition.
Yeah. You mentioned your book. Can you
Yep.
tell us a little bit more about
Sure.
that and what kind of projects do you have to, in the near future? What are your plans?
Sure. So in healthcare, often we do studies, we write articles, and that helps with the kind of the academic credibility. Um, but I often found that other people would kind of take credit for what you did. And so I tried to lay out, hey, here's the facts. So the first book that came out was Transformative Healthcare, and it was a physician-led prescription to save thousands of lives and millions of dollars. And basically, um, the word transformation in healthcare is overused,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody wants to think Deming, PI, Lean, Six Sigma, consultants, and that is all unhelpful and a bunch of BS when you're talking about physicians' clinical decision making. So it's basically based on business school, Harvard, Change Management 101, John Kotter. So if you read John Kotter, if you're a disciple of disruptive innovation, which is Clay Christensen, take those principles and engage physicians that are caring for one particular issue, and then go through, um, uh, instead of the 8 steps, we combined the 8-step down to 4: design, pilot, implementation, sustain. And so that book, we saved thousands of lives and millions of dollars, and chest pain, CABG, sepsis, induction of labor. And it's just an awesome book that that is sold out, but I'm working on the second print. I still have some author copies. So then a few years later, with one of the military aides for President Bush, Navy Bob. Bob Ronsko was a nuclear submarine commander for 28 years in the Navy. And, they always talk, and so he was my co-author, and I had experience from aerospace, medicine, being on a squadron. And so, if you think, and so we wrote a book called High Reliability Healthcare, and it's basically applying the lessons of the nuclear Navy to save patient lives. So what I found is, 25 years ago, To Err is Human came out, healthcare. Somebody read the book Managing the Unexpected, which talks about the 5 pillars of high reliability. I'm sorry, it talks about the 5 principles of high reliability. And everywhere they talk about those 5 principles: deference to expertise, sensitivity to operations. And those are really good in the boardroom. They do not work at all in the bedside. So, if you look at Rickover is the father of the nuclear Navy. He took that power of a nuclear engine and put it on board a submarine. And the hard part, though, was the culture. So the culture of how do you create that high reliable culture? So the book High Reliability Healthcare, we took the watchstanding principles from Rickover, and it's the personal accountability where every nurse, every doctor caring for patients, higher level of understanding, integrity, formality and communication procedures, questioning attitude, and back each other up. And then, and that one is also sold out. So we have the second set coming like next week, and everything's on Amazon. And then the third one, Transforming Presidential Healthcare. And that was, basically stories and, the principles of, how you care for the president, how you care for those on the 18 acres, and, how do you ensure that comprehensive care for the commander-in-chief amid 21st century threats. So usually, I would just call those the trilogy. They're also available straight from, Ballast Books, the publisher. And lots of my time is, people want me to come and speak about one of those 3 topics. And so that's kind of cool because they're, physician change management, high reliability in healthcare, and then, caring for the president. Just depends on if you want sexy, substance, or sizzle. And so, I can do whichever the group wants.
No, that's very interesting. I think your exposure to some of those topics are very important, and I think people should look into your wisdom and those books, and I certainly recommend them. I appreciate you taking the time of being here with us today, and I hope more people will try to contact you and maybe get some more information from you. How they can reach out to you?
I think if they Google Jeffrey Kuhlman, when I do Chat GPT, it still shows up as me. Or jeffreykuhlman.com is the website, JEFFREYKUHLMAN.com. And every day there's people contacting me through the website. Every media outlet in America and international has no problem finding me. So I think your listeners are much higher level of than the media, and happy to help all of them in improving healthcare.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for coming over.
Okay.
We'll follow up maybe with another interview later on and pick your brain on different topics like that. Thank you very much.
Good to chat with you. Thanks.
Are you a busy medical professional striving to excel in life and work? Stellar Success Podcast brings you the habits and insights of top leaders in medicine and beyond. Discover strategies for balance, growth, and fulfillment in every episode. Follow us on Instagram at Stellar Success Podcast for daily inspiration. Start your journey to success today. Subscribe to the YouTube channel now.
That's a wrap on Stellar Success, Leveling Up for Medical Pros with Dr. Tudor Francu. Interested in joining us? Go to stellarsuccesspodcast.com/guest to apply. Stay stellar and level up.